I recently heard that Bill Gates and some others had put $17 million into a company that's going to grow fake meat. Well, for $17 million, you can buy about 25 square miles of farmland and convert it into pasture land and grow all kinds of wonderful grass-fed beef. This fake meat is basically a tumor grown in a laboratory. So if you have one of these burgers, you're basically eating cancer on a bun. In China, the first case of swine fever has been found. You know, when you think about swine fever and bird flu and stuff, what happens is that they cull the herds. They destroy very large numbers of animals rather than have them get sick. So this puts a further cramp on the food supply. In the USA, Georgia blueberry crops take a loss due to spring's colder temperatures. And some blueberry farmers are seeing that they could lose as much as 60% of their crops. In Norway, they are having crop damage by drought. They are talking about crop damage in the range of $133 million US. In the USA, the numbers of pests are climbing in the South Plains and infecting corn, sorghum, and cotton crops in the Panhandle. So this is another thing that will impact on the quantity and quality, because they are advising to act with pesticide treatments if infestation reach damage thresholds, which means these foods will be less healthy for you. Heat is ravaging European fields, sending wheat prices soaring. On his program, the Ice Age Farmer mentioned that there are rumors that the Ukraine is taking steps to halt the export of wheat so that they will have enough to feed their own people. In the USA, excessive rain has done damage to crops. This is no surprise. You know, what happens is that crops drown, the roots rot, and they can develop molds and funguses that are very toxic to humans. In Canada, field conditions worsen in Saskatchewan as the harvest gets underway. And they're doing kind of a premature harvest because the moisture is not there for it to go to maturity. So here's the consequences of bad crops. In India, farmers in Bidar threatened suicide over non-payment of crop insurance. And even in the U.S., during the Great Farm Crisis of a number of years ago, farmers would commit suicide when they got to the breaking point. There was one story of a guy who took his combine out in the field when it was too wet, got the combine stuck, went out with his tractor to try to pull it out, and ended up pulling the combine apart, and went back to his house and pulled on a shotgun and killed himself. Okay, in Germany, the heat will do more damage to agriculture than expected. So their grain harvest may go from an expected 41 million tons down to 36 million tons. So that's a huge, huge chunk, right? That's a 5 out of 40. That's 1/8 or so of their crop disappearing in the heat. Drought brings big worries for farmers across northern Europe. Fields that are usually covered in lush green grass have now turned to dust. Trees are shedding their leaves, and animals are eating dry hay or grain instead of grazing in pastures. And it says the unrelenting heat wave has devastated crops, with more than half of the harvest expected to be lost in some areas. This is just not survivable. In the USA, drought and growing conditions add to threats for Missouri soybean farmers. Growing conditions have also stoked worry, with localized drought threatening to put state growers at an advantage. In Laos, flooding threatens the rice harvest target. Last year, even they lost 130,000 tons of rice to flooding, along with locust outbreaks. Malaysia, farmers are operating at a loss. Every day at dusk, paddy farmers watch helplessly as hundreds of rice field rats plunder their fields, and they avoid poison traps, and their only hope is barn owls. I've been fighting rats here, and the last thing I'm trying is to soak red beans and then put them out raw. Red beans are toxic. I found an old scientific study in which they fed autoclaved or raw red beans to rats, and they died in a few days. Makes their blood clot or something. So, yeah, I've had the trouble with, trying various kinds of traps, and they will spring the traps. They're basically just sneering at me. They push them out of the way. I did recently catch a mouse indoors with one of those glue-type traps. Okay, in Germany, drought may see farmers lose their livelihoods. In South Africa, the 2018 harvest is the most challenging in living memory. And they're having this along with, a lack of drinking water in Cape Town. But they've had 2 years of dry conditions. In Australia, crop estimates are down, and it's like 1 million tons less. They expect 6.9 million tons. The long-term average is 7.9 million tons. In India, Kalahandi farmers are hitting the streets demanding crop insurance. Scotland, fires cause more than 100,000 pounds of damage to crop. Of course, this is kind of a side effect of very dry conditions, which of course we're seeing in California with terrible results. USA, tornado and hail destroy crops, trees, and farm equipment near Hillrose, Colorado. It says, leaving large swaths of farmland bare and trees stripped of leaves. Germany, heat is affecting agriculture. One German town expects to spend an additional 10,000 euros to irrigate trees and shrubs, as well as 30,000 euros to repair heat-related damage. This is just in a small town. High wind in Morgan County caused major loss for area farmers, killing both crops and livestock. In Kenya, farmers record a record drop in the heat harvest. In the North Rift, they expect it to fall by 30%. In the USA, a Colorado farmer lost his entire crop to a hailstorm. We were seeing these last week. They were like lines of, hailstorm potential just marching across the country up there. In the USA, crops and lawns face damage after a 5-day deluge. This is like Lancaster County. It says turf disease has been leaving its mark across county lawns. Turf disease causes the grass to turn brown and eventually kills it. In Ireland, the drought has triggered up to a 20% potato loss. In the Philippines, they're losing crops due to typhoons, and they estimated that 29,000 hectares of rice fields were damaged. In Russia, Grotrans has lowered the forecast of grain production. They've lowered it to 113.8 million tons compared to previous estimates of 115.7 million tons. Australia, drought is bad news for agribusiness.